Hey guys, tonight we begin with one of the strangest forgotten traditions in human history, the secret midnight markets that once appeared across medieval Europe. Not markets filled with glowing signs, shopping carts, and discount coupons screaming at you from every direction. No. These markets existed in silence, under torchlight, in narrow streets where shadows stretched longer than people, and where the line between ordinary business and superstition became uncomfortably thin. So before you get comfortable, take a moment, like the video, and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Let us begin with a strange thought. Imagine waking up at 2 in the morning in a medieval city. No electric lights, no engines humming in the distance, no glowing windows from apartment buildings. Just darkness. Deep darkness. The kind modern people almost never experience. You open a wooden window and cold air slides into the room. Somewhere far away, a dog barks. Somewhere closer, metal hits stone. Then voices. Quiet voices. More voices than there should be. You look down into the street and notice movement. Lanterns. Dozens of them. People carrying baskets, men pulling carts, women wrapped in thick wool cloaks, children running through puddles between boots and wagon wheels. A market has appeared. Not during the day when markets belong. Not beneath warm sunlight with musicians and cheerful crowds. No, in the middle of the night. And oddly enough, nobody seems surprised, because in many medieval towns, certain goods were sold after sunset. Fish arriving late from rivers. Fresh bread baked before dawn. Rare spices carried from distant lands. Traveling merchants who reached city gates after closing hours. Entire temporary worlds unfolded while most people slept. And these places carried an atmosphere daylight could never reproduce. Torches flickered against wet stone walls. Smoke drifted through narrow streets. Faces disappeared and reappeared between shadows. Merchants whispered prices. Buyers examined strange objects beneath dancing orange light. Imagine buying honey while standing beside someone selling bird feathers, candles, dried herbs, and tiny glass bottles containing mysterious powders nobody fully trusted. Imagine hearing 10 different accents in one street. Imagine smelling bread, smoke, wet wool, horses, and rain all blending into one strange perfume. Because medieval trade wasn't organized like modern shopping centers. It was alive, messy, improvised, sometimes chaotic, and night changed people. Daylight gives certainty. Night creates imagination. If a man sold unusual herbs during daylight, he was a merchant. If he sold the exact same herbs under moonlight beside flickering torches, suddenly people started wondering things. Maybe he knew unusual remedies. Maybe he knew forbidden remedies. Maybe he knew things better left unknown. Human beings have always been suspicious after dark, and the medieval world was especially talented at suspicion. Rumors spread easily. People whispered about merchants who never seemed tired, travelers who arrived from distant places without clear explanations, women who sold charms against bad luck, men carrying tiny carved symbols inside leather bags. Ordinary objects sometimes became extraordinary simply because moonlight touched them. One evening, a traveler might purchase a small carved wooden bird because it looked beautiful. By next week, people were whispering that the bird protected homes from evil spirits. By next month, someone claimed their neighbor became wealthy after buying one. By next year, the carved bird had become a lucky symbol, and nobody remembered where the story even started. That happened constantly, because stories travel faster than wagons ever could, and night markets became perfect places for stories to breed, because shadows leave room for imagination. Humans hate empty spaces. We fill them automatically. We always have. But what made these markets truly strange wasn't the food or the merchandise. It was the people who appeared there. Medieval cities closed gates at night. Travel after dark was dangerous. Roads carried thieves, wild animals, and enough uncertainty to make sensible people stay indoors. Yet somehow every midnight market attracted strangers. Always strangers. Men wearing dusty cloaks with accents nobody recognized. Women carrying tiny wooden boxes wrapped carefully in cloth. Old travelers whose boots looked older than the road themselves. Nobody knew where some of them came from. Nobody knew where they went afterward. They simply arrived, traded, vanished, and naturally medieval people, being medieval people, created explanations. Some said these travelers possessed secret knowledge from distant lands beyond mountains and deserts. Others believed they carried cursed objects. Others quietly wondered whether certain merchants were entirely human at all. Because imagine seeing the same old man appear every winter for 20 years without seeming to age much. Today, you might assume good genetics. Medieval Europe had different ideas. Maybe he understood hidden magic. Maybe he had made dangerous bargains. Maybe he had walked somewhere ordinary people could not. And once those thoughts enter a town, they spread like smoke under a door. Soon, children are being warned not to stare at particular strangers. Mothers tell stories beside fireplaces. Men in taverns lower their voices and swear they heard impossible things. One claims he saw a merchant selling tiny mirrors that reflected faces incorrectly. Another swears a traveler knew his name without introduction. Someone else says a woman purchased black candles, and afterward strange weather followed her village for days. Are any of these stories true? Probably not. But truth has always competed with entertainment, and entertainment usually works harder, because reality rarely whispers. Reality rarely appears beneath torchlight at midnight wearing strange clothes and carrying mysterious bags. But stories do. Stories love darkness. And medieval people understood something we still understand today. Sometimes the unknown feels more exciting than the known. Sometimes mystery itself becomes the thing people gather around. And somewhere beneath cold stars and drifting smoke, beneath flickering lanterns and moving shadows, medieval midnight markets became more than places to buy things. They became places where ordinary life briefly stepped aside and allowed imagination to take over. The strange thing about midnight markets was that people rarely arrived there only to buy something. Officially, yes, everyone had practical reasons. Someone needed flour. Someone needed oil. Someone needed thread, salt, dried fish, leather gloves, lamp fuel, or winter cloth. But if you stood quietly beside one of those medieval streets long enough and simply watched, you would notice something interesting. People moved slowly, very slowly. They wandered without purpose. They paused beside stalls selling things they clearly had no intention of purchasing. They listened to conversations that had nothing to do with them, because hidden beneath trade was another product entirely: curiosity. Humans have always been hungry for information. Long before phones and newspapers and endless screens delivering news every second, Information traveled through people. Travelers were living libraries. Merchants were walking newspapers. A single man arriving from a distant city carried weeks or months of stories inside his head. And stories had value. Imagine hearing rumors that a kingdom hundreds of miles away had fallen into war. Imagine hearing that ships from southern seas brought strange fruits nobody had seen before. Imagine hearing whispers of roads blocked by snow, distant kings becoming ill, mysterious stars appearing in the sky, or rivers flooding entire towns. In a medieval world, news traveled at the speed of feet and horses. So people gathered around travelers the way modern people gather around screens. Except this was more personal. You could ask questions. You could stare directly into the face of someone who had seen places you only imagined. And this created a strange social gravity. A fish seller would suddenly stop arranging baskets because a merchant from the east mentioned seeing mountains that appeared blue even during summer. A baker carrying flour would pause because someone described cities where buildings were covered in colored stone. Children sat near wagon wheels, pretending not to listen, while hearing stories about giant forests, dangerous roads, and creatures nobody could quite prove existed. And slowly reality became tangled with invention, because memories are unreliable and people enjoy improving stories. A traveler says wolves followed his caravan for 2 nights. The listener repeats that wolves followed them for 4 nights. The next listener remembers 20 wolves with glowing eyes. A week later, someone claims they heard an entire village disappeared after meeting those same animals. Humans decorate stories naturally. We always have. Midnight markets became giant machines producing rumors and legends faster than anyone could track them. And sometimes, fear joined the process. Fear always joins eventually. People notice patterns because humans desperately want patterns. They noticed that certain merchants arrived before harsh winters. They noticed particular travelers appeared before storms or strange illnesses spread through nearby towns. Coincidences slowly became signs. Signs became beliefs. Beliefs became certainty. There was supposedly one merchant, according to scattered local stories, who sold tiny iron bells no larger than walnuts. The bells made almost no sound when shaken, but people began saying strange things happened after purchasing them. A farmer claimed livestock became restless at night. Another swore dogs barked toward empty fields after sunset. Someone else insisted shadows inside his home felt wrong somehow. Notice something interesting here. Nobody ever accused the bells directly. Nobody said, yes, this object definitely caused these events. Instead, people used softer words. Maybe, perhaps, possibly. Humans love leaving small doors open for mystery. Complete certainty removes the fun. Uncertainty feeds imagination. And once enough people repeated the same stories, nobody remembered where they started. Eventually, children avoided the bell merchant entirely. Parents crossed streets. Buyers looked away from his stall. Was he dangerous? Probably not. Maybe he simply sold bells. Maybe his face looked naturally severe. Maybe bad luck attached itself to him accidentally, because human beings are astonishingly talented at creating patterns from coincidence. Still, if you walk through those streets beneath torchlight and cold air, hearing whispers move between crowds like invisible smoke, you might have wondered too. Because even rational people become slightly different in darkness. Night changes scale. Small sounds become larger. Small movements become suspicious. A stranger standing still for too long suddenly feels important. A cartwheel creaking behind you feels like footsteps. A shadow moving near a wall becomes something watching you. The mind starts filling gaps automatically. Medieval people lived much closer to darkness than we do. They respected it differently. Day belonged to certainty, night belonged to possibilities, and midnight markets existed directly between those worlds. Half business, half dream, half reality, half rumor. Places where ordinary people arrived seeking bread and left carrying stories they would repeat for years. But perhaps the strangest thing about those midnight markets was not the merchants, not the rumors, and not even the stories people carried home afterward. It was the simple fact that some people began visiting without needing anything at all. Think about that for a moment. Imagine walking through cold medieval streets long after sensible people had gone to sleep. Not because you needed bread or oil or winter cloth, but because something about the place pulled you there. Something invisible, something difficult to explain. Humans have always done this. We like places that feel slightly separated from ordinary life. Places where reality seems softer around the edges. And midnight markets had exactly that quality. Because during the day, everyone had roles. The baker baked. The blacksmith worked metal. Farmers worked fields. Guards stood beside gates. Priests performed duties. Every person occupied a clear place inside society. Daylight organized people. But night loosened things. At midnight, the rules felt quieter. A wealthy merchant and a poor laborer could stand beside the same stall, listening to the same traveler describe distant mountains. A local baker might speak with someone from lands so far away that even pronunciation sounded unfamiliar. A child carrying firewood might hear stories meant for adults. Night temporarily rearranged reality, not permanently, just for a few hours. And maybe that was part of the attraction. Medieval life was difficult, very difficult. We sometimes imagine old cities as romantic places filled with candles and castles and dramatic music somewhere in the background. But ordinary life was exhausting. Work began early. Illness was common. Winters could become frightening. People worried constantly about harvests, money, weather, survival. Predictability ruled everything because uncertainty could destroy lives. Then suddenly, several nights each month, torchlight appeared beneath dark skies and ordinary streets transformed. Familiar places became unfamiliar. Familiar people looked different beneath moving shadows. Even stone walls seemed to change personalities at night. There is something deeply human about wanting temporary escape without actually leaving home. Midnight markets offered exactly that. You could remain inside your city while briefly feeling transported somewhere else entirely. A spice merchant opens a cloth bag and suddenly the air changes. Warm scents drift through freezing streets. Cinnamon, strange flowers, dried fruits from distant regions nobody has seen. For a few seconds, you are not standing beside muddy roads and stone buildings anymore. Your mind travels elsewhere. Humans love that feeling. We still do. That is why people buy plane tickets, watch films, read novels. We enjoy temporary transportation. Medieval people simply found it differently. And among these wandering crowds, certain individuals became familiar figures. Not famous exactly, more like recurring mysteries. There was always someone nobody fully understood. Stories describe strange old women sitting beside tiny stalls filled with objects difficult to identify. Smooth stones tied with thread, small wooden carvings, little glass containers holding dried flowers or powdered material nobody recognized. Officially, these items had practical uses: sleep remedies, good luck charms, protective symbols, small comforts for uncertain lives. Unofficially, people wondered things, because people always wonder things. Someone buys a carved symbol and later claims business improved unexpectedly. Another says strange dreams stopped after hanging dried herbs beside a bed. Another quietly mentions feeling watched less often after purchasing tiny iron objects shaped like moons. Notice what happens here. Nobody proves anything. Nobody can prove anything. Yet uncertainty itself becomes powerful. Humans rarely need evidence when emotions already provide answers. If someone feels safer after carrying a small object, does the explanation matter? Maybe not. Maybe believing something works creates its own kind of power. Medieval people lived surrounded by uncertainty, so naturally they collected certainty wherever possible, even small certainty carried inside pockets. But occasionally, stories surrounding these midnight places grew darker, because mystery eventually attracts fear. It always does. People began claiming that certain individuals attended markets without buying anything, selling anything, or speaking much at all. They simply appeared and watched. Quiet figures, standing near walls beneath weak lantern light. Nobody knew them. Nobody knew where they lived. Some claimed they arrived before unusual events happened. A difficult winter, a sickness spreading through nearby villages, strange weather. Again, probably coincidence. Humans connect unrelated things constantly. We are meaning-making machines. Yet once enough people repeat the same idea, coincidence slowly changes shape. It becomes pattern. Pattern becomes expectation. Expectation becomes belief. Children especially notice these things because children observe details adults ignore. They notice the same man wearing the same gray cloak, appearing repeatedly near candle stalls. They noticed old women feeding stray cats beneath wagons. They noticed faces watching from shadows before disappearing into crowds. Children remembered strange things because children have fewer rules about what matters. Adults often dismiss these observations. Yet later around fireplaces, some of those same adults quietly repeated them anyway, just in case. Because certainty during daylight becomes softer at midnight. And beneath drifting smoke and moving lanterns, even ordinary people sometimes felt something difficult to describe. Not fear exactly, not excitement exactly, something between them. Something ancient. The feeling that for a few hours the world had shifted slightly sideways, as if familiar reality moved a few inches out of place, as if ordinary life opened a hidden door and allowed people to peek through briefly before closing again. Maybe that feeling explains why midnight markets survived so long in memory. People remembered food and trade, yes, but more importantly, they remembered atmosphere. They remembered feelings. Humans forget facts quickly. We forget prices. We forget dates. We forget practical details. But we remember how places made us feel. We remember cold air touching faces beneath torchlight. We remember strange music somewhere farther down the street. We remember smoke drifting across moving crowds. We remember standing beside strangers while hearing impossible stories and wondering, even briefly, if maybe some of them were true. And perhaps that was the real merchandise being traded after midnight. Not bread, not herbs, not cloth. Wonder itself. And eventually, like all strange things in history, the midnight markets began to disappear. Not all at once. History almost never works that way. There was no dramatic final night where a bell rang and someone announced that mystery had officially ended. No old merchant standing beneath a lantern saying, "Well, everyone, this is the last one." Instead, they faded quietly. Cities expanded, streets became more organized, trade became regulated. Governments wanted order because governments always want order. Permanent shops replaced temporary stalls. Schedules replaced improvisation. Commerce slowly moved into daylight where things could be counted, taxed, recorded, and controlled. The world became more efficient. Efficiency is useful. Efficiency builds civilizations. But efficiency occasionally steals a little magic on its way through the door. The narrow streets remained, but they changed. The stone walls stayed standing, but they felt different somehow. The torchlight disappeared first. Then the wandering merchants became less common. Then the whispered stories slowly lost places to live. Because mystery needs shadows.